This is Hannibal here from the Hannibal TV on YouTube, and today I have a returning guest, none other than a professor of science at Harvard University, as well as a best-selling author of numerous books, Professor Avi Loeb. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing great. I jogged early in the morning at sunrise as usual.
Oh, that's impressive. So you're an athlete as well.
Yeah, well, since a young age, I could have developed a career in sports, but I thought that thinking is actually a longer term ability that I should follow. And I actually turned down an opportunity to become a member of the Delta Force in Israel when I was recruited for the military, and ended up benefiting from the doing physical activity because I enjoy the company of birds, ducks, bunnies, wild turkeys every morning at around 5 a.m.
I'm sure that's very relaxing for you, but your brain is much better use as a help to humanity, I think.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I guess we can't really use our physical abilities to escape the gravitational pull of the Earth. We need a speed of 11 kilometers per second to escape from Earth, and we can do it with brain power, and we can build spacecraft, and it would really be my great privilege to go to space one day.
Have you heard any updates on the habitation project of Mars that was supposed to be around 2060 or 2050? I believe that Elon Musk was putting together.
Yeah, so Elon has this vision of making humanity a multi-planet civilization because as he argues correctly, there are existential risks on Earth, and we can be wiped out by a single point catastrophe on a single rock that we occupy. And it makes sense to hedge our bets and occupy multiple space platforms. The Earth is just one rock that formed when the sun was made, and Mars is another. I think we should be even more ambitious and go beyond the solar system, become an interstellar species, because there is much more real estate out there. At any event, going to Mars, includes some health risks. I wouldn't recommend it right away because we need to build some infrastructure there, perhaps with robots. The risk is that there is no significant atmosphere, and the temperature changes between day and night by hundreds of degrees. And moreover, there is a constant bombardment of the surface of Mars with cosmic rays, and because Mars doesn't have a strong magnetic field to block them like the Earth does. And so these cosmic rays, energetic particles, would destroy a significant fraction of the cells in the human brain within a few years. And you just cannot stay there unprotected. And of course, one solution is to go underground, which means that we could occupy caves, lava tubes. It would be ironic because humans started prehistorically in caves to protect themselves from the weather. And if we go to Mars, we will go back to living in caves. But I think we can build infrastructure under the ground and potentially inhabit it. Of course, there are other health risks over there that we have to consider. For example, Mars had liquid water up to the middle of its lifespan, about 2 billion years ago. And it's possible that life developed there. The question is whether life was the same as on Earth. And one possible variant is that, all life forms on Earth have the same chirality, meaning the molecules have the same orientation. And this is called the chirality, where when you pass polarized light through a substance made of these molecules, the rotation of the polarization direction is either clockwise or counterclockwise. And in the case of Earth, all molecules obtained of life the chemistry of life favored one chirality, one direction of rotation. The DNA, the RNA are all in one orientation, but there is also the possibility of a mirror image of the molecules that we have on Earth for life. And actually, there was just last week a paper warning not to produce mirror life on Earth because it could be very harmful, because our body will not be able to cope with mirror life. It will pass through, and you could have deadly pathogens that damage life as we know it, because that mirror life could enter our system and damage it. And so there was a warning from several dozens of experts who said we shouldn't produce mirror life in the laboratory because of the risks. But if we go to Mars, Mars is under no obligation to satisfy the recommendation of this group of experts. It could have developed mirror life. So one thing to be careful about is not to be in contact if there is mirror life on Mars, because it could damage our health in yet another way. So going to Mars involves some health risks. That's all I'm trying to say.
The interesting thing you mentioned is if we went somewhere like there, we might be best suited underground. We always hear about the possibility that there could be crypto-terrestrials here that live underground or under the water. Do you think that could be possible?
Well, one thing, if I ever go to Mars, or I'm involved in a project that sends, let's say, drones to Mars to explore those caves, I would like to know if there are any prehistoric paintings on the walls of these caves. There could have been intelligent life there. There could have been visitors. And those caves might have been protected because, recently there wasn't any geological activity that would have erased those things on Mars. So I'm just curious to know if Mars had intelligent life before it became a desert, and also whether it was visited by anyone from far away.
There's a few people asking on here your thoughts on the current situation of drones. I guess not just in the US, but all over the world, but they seem to be concentrated right now around the New Jersey area.
Yes. So all indications, all the information we get publicly suggests that these are human-made because they don't maneuver in ways that are beyond the flight characteristics of human-made drones. So, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. So these are human-made. The question is who made them and who is launching them. And one possibility is, of course, civilians or organizations that are using drones. I mean, drone technology is now highly developed. And also, it's possible that adversarial nations may have sent these drones for espionage, because we all know about the balloon, the Chinese spy balloon that was shot down at the beginning of 2023. And so that was 45 meters in diameter, a huge balloon at a high altitude. But there may also be drones used for the same purpose. According to the latest from the White House, it looks like these are not foreign drones. They were not sent by any adversarial nation. Based on their records, these are all American drones that were either sent by organizations that they are aware of. The claim is that the government knows who put these drones out, or by some government agencies, and that's to monitor the landscape. And so the claim is that there is nothing unusual about these drones from the White House as of this morning. Of course, we should always monitor the sky, because the government does not always know what's going on there. There were 3 reports from the Director of National Intelligence over the past 3 years that argue that there are lots of reports from military personnel and intelligence agencies of objects that they cannot identify. And there was this office established in the Pentagon, the Arrow, or Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, looking back at those reports. And even though they were able to identify most of the reports as mundane, 97% or so, there are still a few percent that are not fully understood. So, it's possible there are objects in the sky that are not what we think they are. And the question is, are they human-made, or did they arrive here from another star? And of course, to find out, we need better data. This is a question that can be addressed with better instruments and monitoring the sky. And in fact, we built an observatory at Harvard University under the Galileo project that I'm leading. And it's obtaining now data on 100,000 objects every month in the sky over Boston. And we actually analyzed 500,000 objects in a recent paper that we posted. And we show how the system works. We analyze the data with machine learning software that is getting better as it's being trained on the data. We're planning to build 2 additional observatories, one in Pennsylvania and the other one in Nevada. And altogether, by summer 2025, we should have 3 observatories operating, and they would give us a few million objects every year that we can look at. And, even if 1 in a million looks really anomalous, it would be of great interest. And if it came from outside the solar system, it would be big news for humanity.
Now, you mentioned the White House's statement from this morning. Yesterday, President-elect Trump, who apparently has likely been getting the same briefings as President Biden, kind of hinted that there was something else going on, and he said he would not be going to New Jersey this weekend due to these strange occurrences. Do you think this is just political statements to rile people up?
No, I think fundamentally, President Trump is trying to be as sincere as possible, but he cannot reveal his sources of information. Of course, they are classified. He must be getting briefings because in just a month he's supposed to become the president, and therefore he needs to be up to date on all the briefings. And so he just cannot reveal the sources of information. And I think, my sense is that he's just telling the truth.
And I also heard the Pentagon say out of 5,000 reports, about 100 are accurate as unidentified, which I guess would be about 2%. Do you think with even 2% that they still haven't been able to figure out what they are, that they could put out a blanket statement like this is nothing to worry about?
Yeah, I mean, if they understand most of the events, they would say there is nothing to worry about. But of course, one has to keep in mind that, even if 1% or even if 1 in 1,000, I mean, there are 1 million drones right now, according to them, over the sky of the US. And, it's sufficient to have even a few out of those that are of potential significance for national security for us to be worried about. So for them to make this, obviously they're trying to calm those people who are nervous about it. But I think the main question that everyone has in mind is whether it represents a national security risk. And we know from the experience with the Chinese spy balloon that the authorities are not always aware even of big things, and it takes them a while to respond to them. And so really what all of this is telling us is that they should do a better job.
The one thing that I found unusual about the Chinese spy balloon is that there was 3 other objects shot down after that, and they never released really any footage or pictures like they did of the spy balloon of what those other objects were.
Yeah. So one thing to keep in mind is the government has much more information than we are aware of. And the reason is very simple. They're spending nearly $1 trillion a year on the defense budget. That's a huge amount of money. It's about a third of the total expenditure on defense or military worldwide. The US spends 1/3 of the worldwide allocation to defense, which is about $2.4 trillion. And so obviously they have a lot of information. There is an array of satellites monitoring the ground. They could see objects that are big enough, bigger than a person. They can definitely resolve them. And I'm sure they looked at the ground from up in space, from satellites, to figure out these drones, if they're big enough. They also have information from all kinds of stations, on monitoring stations on the ground. But they will not reveal that information because they don't want adversarial nations to be aware of the capabilities of the US. So now the question is, when should they release information to the public? And they're extremely cautious about that. And that's why we don't hear much. But I'm sure behind the scenes, they're really trying to figure out every detail about these drones and about any other national security threat. They will not tell us because for two reasons. One, they do not want to expose the level of intelligence the US gets. And we see, of course, how capable the US government is when alerting, for example, for a launch of ballistic missiles from Iran, back in April towards Israel. There was also a lot of information that was gathered on the war in Ukraine. I mean, the intelligence agencies did an excellent job in alerting the US president before it happened. And so we know that they know quite a lot, and that is coming into light during very stressful situations, politically speaking. But they do it all the time. And they are extremely cautious and careful as to what to release to the public. They also want to calm down everyone, and therefore it's quite natural for them to say everything is under control. It's just like a parent telling their kids not to worry about anything, even though that they know that there could be a risk here. So parents do that very often.
As far as the alleged plasma orbs, there does appear to be some objects that don't look like drones. I mean, the government has not released any of their own footage of drones or orbs, so we really don't know, as you mentioned, what they have, and some of these could be fake, but there have been some news agencies that have also recorded the more orb-like objects that possess some of the 5 observables of a UAP.
Yeah, well, one thing to keep in mind is that is the optics. Sometimes the instruments used to record the images introduce artifacts. They introduce special shapes to the objects one is looking at, and it's simply the optics of the camera that is being used. And without us knowing what these cameras were and how they were taking the photos, we can't make a lot of sense from that. That's why we are trying within the Galileo project to use our own data, not to rely on anyone else, because we calibrate the instruments, we know how they perform, we tested them on known sources. In fact, we are testing them on our own drone. And so this way, we know what the sensors are doing and how well they operate under different conditions, so we can figure out what we are looking at. But when you get some image from an unknown source, it's really difficult to tell if that's really the way the object was looking like, or maybe there was some distortion introduced by the way the image was taken or by the instrument itself.
Have you had any interest in bringing some of your equipment or sending some people to the New Jersey area so you could observe with your own equipment what's going on?
Yeah, well, I got numerous emails from people who encouraged me to do that, and also some discussion within the Galileo project. But at the end, I looked at all the evidence, and it looked to me like these are human-made. And this is really a subject that should be under the jurisdiction of the intelligence agencies, the FBI. They should look into that. The law enforcement authorities. Anything that is human-made is not of interest to me as a scientist that cares about what happens outside the solar system. I don't want to get into objects that belong to adversarial nations or to our government. I mean, this is something the government should deal with. And I want to really consider those anomalous objects that have nothing to do with the US government or adversarial nations. These are objects that arrived at Earth from outside the solar system. And one way to tell is if you were to see an object moving extremely fast, faster than the escape speed from the solar system. Astronomers saw such objects, a few of them, over the past decade for the first time. And that's what drew me into the subject. That's why I established the Galileo project and also went to the Pacific Ocean on an expedition to search for the materials from the crash site of the first interstellar meteor.
And what were your findings from that exhibition?
From the expedition, that was June 14th to 28th, 2023, about a year and a half ago. And we collected materials and mostly molten droplets, less than a millimeter in size, smaller than a grain of sand, that were meteoritic material left over from a meteor explosion. And we went to the site of the fireball of this meteor that was discovered by US government satellites back on January 8th, 2014, about a decade ago. And in that location, we found those materials using a magnetic sled, a sled with magnets on both sides that we placed on the ocean floor that is about a mile deep. And we went back and forth. And then I brought the materials back to Harvard University, gave them to my colleague, Professor Stein Jacobson, who is a world-renowned geochemist, has the best equipment in his laboratory. And he analyzed those materials and found that about out of 850 spherules, these molten droplets, about 10% have a composition that was never reported in the literature, that is different from solar system materials. There are some elements like beryllium, lanthanum, uranium that are up to 1,000 times more abundant than in the material that made the solar system. And so we think that's a hint that we found materials from that meteor. That meteor was clearly from outside the solar system. It was moving, if you go back in time and extrapolate what its speed was, it was moving faster than 95% of the stars near the sun, and at around 60 kilometers per second outside the solar system. That means it was moving a distance similar to that of a car on a highway. A car on a highway passes that distance in an hour, and it took this meteor to about a second to cross the same distance that a car passes in an hour. So it was extremely fast, and moreover, it exploded only 20 kilometers above the Pacific Ocean surface, and that means that it was able to sustain extreme stress, much more than all other meteors in the NASA catalog, hundreds of them. So because it was made from unusual material strength and also moving very fast, I was curious to know whether it's a Voyager-like meteor, an object that was made artificially, or think about the Tesla Roadster car that Elon Musk launched in 2018 as a dummy payload on the Falcon Heavy rocket. And that car, if it were to collide with Earth, and it might do so in 20 million years, my colleagues would argue that it's a rock of a type that they've never seen before, and it would have an unusual material strength. So I think we should just check every object that came from outside the solar system and see whether among the rocks there are also some space trash, some artificially made objects. Because if it was made by another civilization, even if it's trash, it's not functional anymore, it would still be our treasure to find it.
Based on the idea that Oumuamua may have been an artificial probe or sign of extraterrestrial technology, what specific observations or experiments would you propose for future interstellar objects to definitively distinguish between natural and artificial origins?
Yeah, so gladly in 2025, there is a new survey telescope called the Rubin Observatory in Chile that will survey the southern sky every 4 days, the entire sky. It will employ a camera with 3.2 gigapixels, about 1,000 times more pixels than your cell phone camera. And it has a good chance of seeing objects like Oumuamua every few months, based on the great sensitivity that it will have. I am working with my students and postdocs to develop a way of analyzing the data to find Oumuamua-like objects. And I also propose to the Webb telescope to look at any such object that the Rubin Observatory finds, because the Webb telescope is about 1 million miles away from Earth. And if we look at the same object from Earth using an observatory that is positioned on Earth, and from the Webb telescope, we would see it from 2 different directions. So just like having 2 eyes, we have 2 eyes rather than 1 because it allows us to gauge the distance of a predator. That was helpful for animals that had 2 eyes, and they survived better than animals with 1 eye. And so if we have the Webb telescope and an observatory on Earth looking at an Oumuamua-like object, we could track the position of the object very precisely in 3 dimensions and monitor how it's moving. And we can easily tell whether it has propulsion, the way Oumuamua had, beyond the gravity of the sun. And in addition, the Webb telescope can figure out the temperature, the surface temperature of the object, because it detects the heat, the infrared radiation emitted by an object like that. And it could also detect how much flux is coming in the infrared, so it would be able to pin down the distance to the object. We did not have a distance estimate for Oumuamua, a good way of telling the actual size of Oumuamua. It was not resolved. But in the case of a future object, given that we have the ability of telling the distance very precisely from triangulation and from the flux, the infrared flux that the Webb telescope measures, and given the flux that is detected, we can tell the size of the object. And so the size is extremely important. And if it's, for example, tumbling, we can tell how the size is evolving over time as the object is spinning. So we will get altogether much more information about a future object like Oumuamua, given that now we have the Webb telescope that can look at it. And that would allow us to conclusively decide whether it's some iceberg or icy rock or some artificial object, because it behaves in ways that you cannot explain in the language of comets or asteroids.
The drone sightings in New Jersey have got me thinking about the von Neumann probes idea that you've talked about. In your idea that Oumuamua may have been gathering data or dropping local probes, do you have any further thoughts on the ideas around self-replicating probes that could be in our system?
Yeah, so one reason they might visit us is because there is liquid water on Earth, and using sunlight, one can break water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen, the 2 constituents of water. And both hydrogen and oxygen are very good fuels for propelling any device. And so there could be a good reason for visiting the region around the sun that may allow for liquid water on the surface of planets, in particular the Earth. So that's one reason for such self-replicating probes to visit the Earth. It can provide the fuel for them to do whatever they want. And the second is the raw materials that can be used to build replicas of themselves. Now, we have never sent an autonomous probe. For that, you need the artificial intelligence, because so far we just helicopter parented all the objects that we send to space. That includes the Perseverance rover or the helicopter, Ingenuity helicopter on Mars, they were all managed by engineers in Pasadena, in the Jet Propulsion Lab. And we still have a ways to go to launch autonomous probes that can make decisions on their own, and they only send us every now and then some news flash. It's sort of like sending your kids away from home, and they report back every now and then about the highlights of their journey. We haven't done that yet with space probes, but I think that's the wave of the future. And another civilization could have done it already. Now, the von Neumann probes, I mean, the self-replicating probes are another step forward, and that not only that these would be autonomous and could decide on their own, by the way, which is a necessary quality for any long travel, because there is just not enough time to communicate signals back to the sender and wait for instructions from the sender. The probe must be able to manage its own doings on some foreign territory because of the large distances. But the second aspect is the ability of the probe to replicate itself. And by the way, nature did that. When a flower sends its seeds in the wind, like the dandelion flower, that those seeds contain the DNA, the genetic information of how to make replicas of the flower. And nature does it routinely. And we are still a long way from doing it ourselves, basically building a robot that can use raw materials and build more robots like itself. I mean, it would be amazing if, for example, we had cars that can self-heal after a minor accident. We have to bring them to the repair shop. But just think about a car that could fix itself. If it bumps into something, just like when we bump into something, eventually the wound heals. And imagine having a car like that. We have not accomplished that. I mean, we are not even close yet to doing that. And not to speak about a car that can produce more cars like it, which is exactly what we are doing during our lifespan. We can produce kids. That's an amazing ability that nature accomplished, and we still have a ways to go. But another civilization that has science and technology for more than 1 century, we discovered quantum mechanics just a century ago. And just think about what we might discover in the next millennium, 1,000 years from now, or maybe 1,000,000 years from now. And another civilization may have had a head start, because most of the stars formed before the sun. The sun formed just in the last 1/3 of cosmic history. So there could have been another civilization far more advanced than we are, and they could have sent self-replicating probes. And one way to approach it is to have indeed some mothership, some bigger spacecraft that is just like the dandelion flower, releasing smaller probes that can replicate themselves and carry the information. So these are all possibilities that we haven't been able to accomplish with our own technologies, but someone else, there might be a smarter kid on our block.
And as far as SETI, what do you think of the methodology that SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Life, uses? They listen to the hydrogen band, and they only listen to limited bands and detections. Is this lack of real coverage of the reason SETI has not detected anything? Or is it a data collection problem? Are they not looking at the data properly?
Well, for more than 60 years, they've been looking for radio signals or electromagnetic signals. That's what they focused on. And that is a method that is similar to waiting for a phone call at home. Nobody may call you when you are listening. Just doing that, even for a century, represents a small fraction of the age of the Milky Way galaxy, and we might have missed the calls in the past. There is a better method, which I'm trying to explore with the Galileo project, and that is to look for a package in our backyard, because even if the sender is dead, the package will still be there. The packages that we send to interstellar space, like Voyager 1, Voyager 2, Pioneer 10, Pioneer 11, and New Horizons. Those packages will leave the solar system in 10,000 years. They are moving 10 times slower than the escape speed from the Milky Way galaxy. So they are bound by gravity to the Milky Way. And if other civilizations produced crafts like that, they would keep accumulating over time. They will not escape from the Milky Way. And just like plastics in the ocean, they will keep accumulating. And when you find a plastic bottle in the ocean, you know that it came from a technological origin. It's not natural. And you might find the message in the bottle. And so that is the approach that I'm suggesting. And we haven't explored that for more, only over the past decade, we found the first interstellar objects. And I think it's more promising, given the fact that we have detected a few interstellar objects. The estimate is that there are about 1 million objects, roughly the size of a person, from interstellar space within the orbit of the Earth around the sun. 1 million of them. We can't see them because they reflect very little sunlight. Oumuamua was 100 times bigger. It was the size of a football field. That's why we noticed it. But if we are dedicated to searching all interstellar objects and finding out whether any of them was produced artificially, we can potentially, at the investment of hundreds of millions of dollars, build the necessary equipment to look at all objects from interstellar space that are within the orbit of the Earth around the sun, 1 million of them. It's just a question of priorities. And I think this question is extremely exciting for the public. And even if we just find rocks, they will tell us what happens in the neighbor's yard because they came from other stars. And it's exciting for us to figure out what they're made of and what was their history. So I think it's an exciting frontier waiting to be discovered.
Now, as someone that's familiar with drones, there's been a few people asking today about the New Jersey mayor. One of them came out this morning saying that radioactive material had gone missing a couple of weeks ago. The way that the drones are kind of appearing to be scanning and flying low, based on your knowledge of drones, do you think they could potentially be searching for something radioactive?
It's possible. Those drones that originated from law enforcement organization and from government could have had a task. And if they did, the government should tell us about it. Maybe they are worried that it will create panic if there was some spill of some dangerous material. I just don't know the facts of the matter.
I recently interviewed John and Jerry Tedesco, who worked for you in the past, and they were telling me, I guess they support your work and everything, but they felt that Harvard was not investing enough in the absolute top of the line equipment. Since they left, has the equipment improved, or is it a matter of funding or how they want to allocate funding to not have the absolute best?
No, I would not agree with that. We are using the absolute best. And in fact, every observatory that we build is worth about $1 million in terms of the equipment we use, in terms of the amount of effort put to assemble it and then analyze the data from it. So I would argue, this is the most extensive and as of now, the only scientific attempt to build observatories that monitor the sky 24/7 for a period of years. There is no other group that did that. And we are doing it in a scientific way, and you can read the details in the paper that we posted a month ago on the archive, the archive of preprints. And that paper contains results, data on 500,000 objects. And I encourage everyone to have a look there and have a look at what the Galileo project is doing. In fact, it's the highest quality work. There are other groups that may have done work for a few days, maybe a week or a few months, and that was done with instruments that were rented or lower quality instruments that were purchased. But we are really investing. I mean, we don't lack any funds. We have three. We are in the process of building three extensive observatories, and they will involve within a month or so. We are planning to put together triangulation systems with multiple units that are separated by a few miles, so we can figure out the distances of objects. That was not done by any other group. That they did not employ multiple units separated by a few miles that would provide triangulation with a very reliable data rate. So, and we are also doing state-of-the-art work in terms of machine learning analysis. And by the way, this is not Harvard University which is putting the money for it. It's all supported by donations that I received by people that came to my home and said that this research is very exciting and we would like to support it. And actually, within a year, there will be a Netflix documentary that everyone can watch about the expedition to the Pacific Ocean, as well as the observatories monitoring the sky. So I would actually say that there is no other group right now doing this quality work.
So they might be saying that just because now, I guess they wouldn't be in competition with you, but they're involved in their own group.
I'm not sure why they're saying that, but one can just look at their paper and look at our paper and compare.
Now, you mentioned the Netflix documentary. You've also put out several books, Interstellar, as well as Extraterrestrial. Could you tell us a little bit about these books, which are available on Amazon?
Yes, so Extraterrestrial was all about Oumuamua and the possibility that it was artificial in origin and the implications of that. Interstellar is talking about the idea that we are not the smartest kid on the block and what we might learn from other civilizations and what the implications would be for the future of humanity. Right now I'm actually starting to write the third book, which is about the expedition to the Pacific Ocean. I have an agreement with MIT Press, and it hopefully will be finished within a year and then get published in 2026. That will come after the Netflix documentary that will also show some footage from that expedition. And altogether, I should say that there is a huge amount of interest from the public in what we did. And in fact, in a couple of months, a sculptor, one of the most celebrated sculptors in the US, Greg Wyatt, he will be bringing two sculptures that he produced made of bronze to my office at Harvard. And they are showing Galileo Galilei, and we will have a special ceremony accepting those. And other artists are also inspired by the work. There is a play that was written about the research that I'm doing, and there was a song written, and I'm supposed to meet a group of celebrities in about half a year to talk about the research. And actually the TED Talk that I gave that was made public in July 2024, that TED Talk is now one of the top 5 most popular of 2024. There was an announcement about that a couple of weeks ago. So check it out. It's about 18 minutes long, and a lot of people resonated with the work we are doing.
Are you one of the people that are going to sing the song?
No, I don't. I'm not qualified to do that. I was also asked if I want to narrate my books for the audio version, and I said no. It's better if someone professional does it. I recognize my limitations. You know, there are people who do some things better than I do.
As far as NASA, a lot of people say NASA has more knowledge than they let on about what's going on, and that Mike Gold that recently testified at the congressional hearings may have not been totally honest about what he knows. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there was a committee that was established by NASA to look at UAP and give recommendations. And unfortunately, to my disappointment, that committee basically recommended to do what the Galileo project is already doing. And they recommended it 2 years after we established the project. So there was nothing really new there. But as a result of that report, which, by the way, was triggered by me approaching the director of the science division at NASA, as a result of that report, they decided to basically relay any important information about UAP directly to the Pentagon. And to me, that signals the fact that they suspect that most of that information will be of national security relevance. So instead of them taking the scientific perspective on this, which is to say, we are curious to see if any of those UAP might be extraterrestrial in origin, instead of taking that perspective, they decided to consider the subject as related to national security and basically communicate the information straight to the Pentagon. And that means that it will not be available to the public. There are no new funds allocated for the scientific research of UAP. And so either they're confident that all UAP must be human-made, or they just prefer to avoid any stigma related to the subject, which is unfortunate because we should figure out the truth and be brave to consider all possibilities until we figure out what these objects are.
As far as the Vatican Observatory, we always hear that they know possibly more than any other observatory. What do you know about the Vatican's capabilities? Because a lot of people wouldn't associate religion with even having an observatory.
Right. The Vatican has a complex history with astronomy, because when Nicolaus Copernicus, who was a priest, told them that he believes that based on data that the sun may be at the center of the solar system, they banned his book until the 19th century, De Revolutionibus, which I have behind me on my left. I got this copy during the 550 years celebration to the birth of Nicolaus Copernicus just about a year ago, when I was invited to give a talk in Torun, Poland, where he was born. And the title of my talk was "The Next Copernican Revolution," which is that we are not at the intellectual center of the universe, not at the physical center. So the Vatican also, of course, put Galileo Galilei in house arrest when he argued that the moons of Jupiter move around Jupiter, not around the Earth. And therefore the Earth is not the center. And in 1992, they admitted that Galileo was correct. And that was 20 years after humans landed on the moon. It's a bit late. So it's good that the Vatican has an observatory. It's good that they're open-minded about exploring astronomical questions now. But, the science should be pursued without any prejudice, without any agenda. We should collect as much data as possible, because our imagination is not as developed as that of nature. We often underestimate nature. Nature is much more imaginative than we are. And the only way to educate ourselves and realize that the reality is different than what we think is by collecting evidence. That will guide us, that will change our point of view. And we should be humble. We know very little as of now. We tend to think that we accomplished a lot, but we actually don't even know what most of the matter in the universe is. 85% of matter is called dark matter. We don't know what it is. We don't know what the vacuum is even made of. It's called dark energy. And so and we don't know what happened before the Big Bang. We don't know what happens inside a black hole. There are lots of questions that have no good answer within the current knowledge of physics and science. And so we should collect as much data as possible to guide us. And it's good that the Vatican is recognizing that, because, half a millennium ago, they did not. They thought they know the truth without even looking through telescopes. And Galileo argued, look through my telescope and you will realize that this idea that you have, that the Earth is at the center, is wrong. Now, of course, we are able to reach Mars as a result of the fact that we recognize that Mars doesn't revolve around the Earth. And what I'm trying to say is that knowing reality, the physical reality, is always to our benefit, even if it's not flattering our ego. Nature is under no contract to make us happy. We might want to think that we are the smartest that ever lived since the Big Bang. That's what we keep telling ourselves. I mean, including the mainstream of science. They say, oh, thinking that there is intelligent life elsewhere is an extraordinary claim. And I say, no, it's not extraordinary. It's actually extraordinary for you to think that you are the smartest, because we know that planets like the Earth, exist in many other places, roughly at the same separation from stars like the Sun. There are billions of examples within the Milky Way galaxy, probably, based on what we know right now. And what makes you think that things like us did not exist billions of years ago? The only way to find out is to search for them. And we should seek the evidence. Nevertheless, the mainstream says, no, that's too speculative, that's too risky, therefore we should not allocate funds towards the search for intelligent civilization. So very little funding is allocated to that compared to the search for microbial life, primitive life. The astronomy community is willing to spend $11 billion in the next big observatory called the Habitable World Observatory. And the goal is to find those gases like oxygen, methane in the atmospheres of exoplanets that would be indicative of the existence of microbes. The problem is that these gases of oxygen or methane, they could be produced by other processes. And moreover, we don't know if they're easy for us to detect. And on the other hand, even if one technological civilization produced self-replicating probes in the Milky Way galaxy, they could be everywhere. And when we find one of them, that would tell us that not only there is life, but intelligent life in the Milky Way. So the signatures of technology could be far more clear, even if they are rare. And therefore, we should invest hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe billions, in searching for them as well at the same time, just to hedge our bets, because we don't know what we will find first.
Just a couple more questions here. I heard you say in another interview that as far as the various congressional hearings, I think there's been 3 so far on the UAP topic. We can't take this 100% serious, what the people giving the testimony are saying, because a lot of them aren't providing any direct evidence. And they're saying things like, oh, we can talk about it in a skiff later. And I understand a lot of these skiff conversations haven't even happened. Why do you think they might not be being fully honest with us? Or is it just maybe they're misunderstanding something?
No, I think they are probably honest. I mean, they are testifying under oath, and I believe I know many of them personally, and I think actually I spoke with all of them, both in the latest hearing and those that participated in the first hearing, and I spoke with them, and I think they are all serious people that are honest. They are sincere about what they're saying. But the question is whether the things that they describe, represent clear evidence in terms of materials, in terms of relics of spacecraft from an extraterrestrial origin. And for us to figure this out, we have to see that material. We have to see directly that the evidence, because they could have been fooled by hearsay. I can imagine that there are retrieval and reverse engineering programs within government. I have no issue imagining that, because these programs are aimed to look for technologies developed by adversarial nation. nations. And so if you imagine a plane, an aircraft crashing, it would be of great use for us to collect materials from there. And if there's any component that is still operating, that would be even better, because then we can figure out what adversarial nations have, nations like China, Russia, any other nations. So programs to retrieve and reverse engineer any materials collected from crash sites must exist. The question is whether they collected materials that were not human-made. And there are very simple ways to test that, because if those craft or materials came from outside the solar system, they, for example, would have an age or a composition of isotopes that would tell us that they are not from the solar system. That can be easily checked. You can date the age of materials just by measuring the relative abundances of elements that decay radioactively. And if the age turns out to be different from the age of the material that made the solar system, that would be clear indication that they came to visit us from somewhere else. I haven't seen such data. And then if there are any functioning devices, I would like to see them. And just if people mention that someone told them that such things exist, that is not sufficient evidence, because that someone could have fabricated the story. Maybe all of this story is triggered by human-made equipment that was retrieved, and then the intelligence agencies wanted to hide that information, and so they just invented a cover story that it's extraterrestrial in origin, just to confuse and put a stigma on any discussion related to that. So then if you would hear that story, you would think, oh, there is really something unusual there, but there is nothing except for a story. And so to differentiate between a story and whether something really exists, we need to see the evidence directly. We cannot rely just on what people say. And if I were one of these Congress people that organizes these hearings, instead of making a public show where they speak publicly about it, I would investigate it carefully, just trying to see if there is any evidence that is credible, without trying to impress the public. It's not really a Hollywood show or a television show where you're just showing that you're curious about this question, which is pretty much what some of these hearings look like, where people would virtue signal, basically show that they care about it, that they're excited by the questions. This is a serious matter. We need to find out if there is anything behind it, and if not, let's move on. For me, it's the question of whether, if the government has such materials or data, it would save me a lot of time, because I will not have to study the subject independently.
That's a good point, that some of these Congress people are actually becoming famous for their interest in UAPs. But the final question here, we've heard people like Lou Elizondo, who you've talked to, say this could be a threat, and there could even be an imminent threat, which is why he's wants more people like you that have very great intelligence to be looking into this to possibly find a solution. What do you think the chances are that there is some type of imminent threat, and this is the reason why we're getting more and more government coverage of the topic lately?
Well, I think the nature of UAP is an important problem, because it either reflects the inability of the intelligence agencies to figure out some objects that are in the sky, and that should be resolved, because we don't want the US to be vulnerable to technologies from adversarial nations. And of course, the second possibility is that it's extraterrestrial, which would be even a bigger punchline. And in both cases, we owe it to the public to figure out the answer. So I completely agree with this sentiment from Lou, that more people should be, scientists should be looking into that. But since we don't have any data that is publicly available, that of scientific quality, we are collecting it within the Galileo project, and we are making it public. So stay tuned, because I hope that in the coming years we will learn much more. And aside from objects near Earth that are called UAP, there are all these interstellar objects that are passing near Earth, never colliding with Earth, but look weird, like Oumuamua. And it would be fun to figure out what these are. And the best way to figure it out is by collecting more information, getting more data. I just want to be flooded with data. People who want to stick with what they already know, like experts on comets or asteroids, one of them told me, Oumuamua was so weird, I wish it never existed. And another one told me that now he is finding some dark comets. By dark, he means that these are objects that have non-gravitational acceleration, but they don't show any evidence for cometary tail. And so to me, that sounds like calling any animal that doesn't have stripes, calling it an unstriped zebra. We know of a lot of animals that do not have stripes, for example, elephants, but they have nothing to do with zebras. So when you use an oxymoron, which is dark comets, that means comets are identified by their cometary tail, but you are talking about objects that do not have a cometary tail. However, they accelerate in ways that you cannot understand. So you say, oh, maybe their cometary tail is invisible, which is pretty much what the mainstream point of view is on these objects, like Oumuamua as an example. The correct way is to describe them as objects that show anomalous acceleration. We don't know if they're comets. Maybe they have some other means of propulsion. And what I'm trying to say is that within science, people who stick with the dogma, with past knowledge, very often are using a nomenclature that is putting their mind to rest. I mean, they feel much more relaxed if they call it comets, because these are familiar objects. And so they can say it's a comet that doesn't show the properties of a comet, just like an unstriped zebra. My suggestion, I mean, of course, we know of albino zebras where the stripes are fainter, but they are still showing stripes. You can't call a zebra without it showing any stripes, which is pretty much what these experts on comets are doing, and calling these comets that don't show a cometary tail, they call it dark comets, simply because they appear to have some propulsion that we don't understand. And I hope that by getting more data, eventually we will get to the bottom of what the nature of these objects is, because we can clear the fog that the comet experts put, as just to distract attention from the anomalies of these objects. And the best way to learn something new is to get as much data as possible that will convince us that they are not comets, for example, some of them.
I don't know if you have time to answer one quick fan question. They wanted to know your thoughts on Skinwalker Ranch.
Well, the problem with that location is that it was publicly advertised, and then it's vulnerable to hacks. Anyone that wants to create some weird phenomena would go there and produce something. So we don't know how much of the things that were reported there were the result of people trying to fool whoever is checking what happens there. And that's my problem with that site, that it's publicly known, and humans are known to introduce all kinds of hoaxes. And so I would not be surprised, for example, if as a result of the public attention to the New Jersey drones, there were lots of drones that were launched by humans, by people, just trying to create even more confusion. So it was a self-induced phenomena. And that's the problem I have with those, with a place like the ranch, where people knew exactly where it is and could have introduced all kinds of unusual phenomena artificially.
Very good. Well, I really appreciate you being so generous with your time and answering so many questions. Your website is on the bottom of the screen here if people want to look at your essays and find out more information on the Galileo project and everything you're involved with. And I'll let you close this off with wherever you want to tell the fans they can follow you on social media and whatever you want to say to wrap this up. Thank you again very much, sir.
Thank you for having me. You can just follow my essays on medium.com. I don't have any footprint on social media. I don't care how many likes I get. But just follow the work we are doing, and there will be a Netflix documentary, hopefully within the coming year. That should be quite exciting, and a lot may happen in 2025. So stay tuned. We are doing our best, and keep your inspiration from the stars. Happy